Okay, and testing.
Testing.
And we are on.
Let's
Mike
do
Nash
it.
in the house. How are you?
Ethan Nash in the house. I'm well. How are you doing, Ethan?
I'm doing quite well. Sitting here in my office, aka basement at the moment, and looking forward to having a nice conversation with you today.
Yeah, me too. I'm actually in my office in my basement in my favorite chair and really feeling comfortable. And hey, though there's actually a problem we need to deal with before we start today.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I don't want to throw you off your game, but I tell you, I've actually heard now from, I don't know, three or four people that they cannot tell the difference between you and me when we're talking. And I don't know. I mean, we must share some DNA or something because we sound exactly the same according to our listeners. I don't think so. I can tell when you're talking and I can tell when I'm talking, which is a really stupid thing to say, but
Wow, that means you're not completely crazy then.
no, yeah, you're right. But so we got to fix this. So here's my proposal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you will agree. For this episode, you're going to talk like Donald Duck, and I'm going to talk like Michael Nash, and our listeners will always know who's talking. What do you think?
That sounds good. Can I work on the Donald Duck impression for a while? I've been practicing, but I'm not sure if it's ready for prime time yet.
All right. Well, you can do Gollum or you can do anyone you want, just as long as it's not Ethan.
Sweet, juicy fish. But the fat one, he knows.
Oh, my God.
Now, I want the listeners to decide, whose impression was that? Was that Donald Duck or Smeagol? Leave us a comment. Let us know. What do you think? Donald Duck, Smeagol. This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, yeah, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me, specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck. Oh my God,
Anyways,
that was good. That was really good.
Listeners, I'm sorry if you can't tell us apart when we speak. I don't know what to tell you. Deal with it.
Well, yeah. If you're listening to us and the person sounds really measured and wise and smart, you're probably listening to Ethan.
Oh, flattery. Hey, let's do this episode.
All right,
so,
let's do it.
Just for some context, we are recording this episode on March 19th, 2020, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm in Seattle, Washington, and everything is shut down. You are over in Leavenworth, Washington area. They're probably a little bit behind, but not much further. Are things shut down over there yet?
Oh yeah, we're on day 3 now of everything being closed.
Wow. So weird time, and all of a sudden, we are now in a completely remote economy. Obviously, I'm being somewhat facetious with that. It's not totally remote, but millions of people are now working from home,
right?
That don't normally do that, which brings challenges, and it's novel territory. So today, I thought it would be quite appropriate to talk about running remote meetings. We just spent 2 episodes talking about running meetings that bring actual joy to people sometimes and don't suck your soul and are productive. So we have 2 episodes on that. But let's dive into the remote meeting world and how to make these effective as we're all working from home.
Yeah, it's really good timing, I think, for probably for many of you listeners out there. It's actually real time for us here with Nash Consulting. We've just been busting our butt in the last, couple weeks to figure out how we're going to not only work with each other using a remote meeting platform, but we're connecting with all of our clients, and we're transitioning live meetings into remote meetings. So it's a real thing right now for us too.
Indeed. It is sure an adventure at this point. Yeah, we're like you said, we're figuring out this technology, and to be honest, I've really enjoyed it. And I've really enjoyed, in a lot of ways, improving a skill, right? Having remote meetings and doing remote trainings, improving that skill in a way that I probably wouldn't have already tried to improve this skill unless we were under the circumstances that we are currently under.
Oh, that's exactly right. Same with me. This was a thing I had in the background. Boy, if I need it every so often, I'll make it work. We've been sort of forced into a world where we've got to. Well, we've decided actually we're going to kind of become experts at this. We're really figuring this out.
Yeah. Yep. We're leaning into this, and in a lot of ways, the economy is kind of going more and more towards remote teams.
Right.
Obviously, not completely, but we're a global economy, and sometimes you just have to meet with your team remotely. So, um, that said, I want to ask you, the last two episodes that we ran on running meetings, we
Right.
talked about kind of those meeting expectations. Now we're taking that and putting it in the lens of remote meetings. Do any of those meeting expectations, code of conducts, do those change?
And that's a great way to start this episode, because I want to maybe just mention to our listeners here that there's an overall principle that there's actually several sort of overall principles when it comes to really effective and enjoyable remote meetings. And the first one is you have to take the basic meeting expectations, which you just referred to like as the
Hmm.
code of conduct, but you also take your facilitation skills and all the things you do to run a good meeting. You basically take almost all of those. There's a few exceptions, but almost all of those, and you just turn the dial right up to 11. You almost have to think in terms of what I need to do for an in-person meeting. I have to do actually better or more for a remote meeting, because frankly, face it, remote meetings are tough. They're difficult for the leader, they're difficult for the participants. And so you basically have to think in terms of, if I want this meeting to be effective and enjoyable, I have to so much be on my game when it comes to facilitating. And you guys as participants have to be totally on your game. So let's just turn everything up to 11.
Okay, so the first rule with running remote meetings is all the other meeting expectations that we discussed just on steroids.
Yep.
So, if you wouldn't mind, could you just kind of review a few of those meeting expectations that we talked about a few weeks ago, just so we have those in front of mind?
Yeah, Ethan, that's a great place to start. We talked about some best practices for running meetings and for participating. Let's start with, well, the agenda. The facilitator having a good agenda that is clear and says exactly what we're going to be doing, so that people can have some process time. Having a time column over on the right, so we know how long we're going to spend on things. Getting that agenda out to people. I think that's even more important for remote meetings, so that your processors and, well, everyone has time to kind of get into it and get their head around what's happening. That's a basic meeting principle that you just really have to hone in on when you're doing remote meetings. I would say things like running a meeting that is participatory. Again, that's harder remote, and we'll talk about that today, but you have to be thinking in terms of, this can't just be one of those, meetings you could have emailed me. You have to find ways to get people involved, and we'll talk about that. Meeting participation, things like not talking over each other, not, except, etc., not interrupting, being really present. I think that's probably one that and again, we'll circle back to this, but it is so easy in a remote meeting. You've probably been in these meetings where, people are eating lunch, or they're working on their own thing, or they've kind of checked out. And it's easy to do that because you're physically not in the same room as everybody else. So you feel more kind of insulated from the whole scene. And it's just, that can just be the kind of the death knell of a meeting is those kinds of behaviors. And so, yeah, remote meetings, again, you have to really focus on what it means to be present and focused and have your skin in the game. Yeah, those are just a sample of some of the stuff that we talked about before that we have to be especially mindful of during these remote meetings.
Yeah, to me, when it comes to remote meetings, it seems like a lot can be lost, right?
Right.
You're not physically in the room with people. Like you said, it's easier to check out. It's easier not to stay engaged. And so, with using technology, you just have to go the extra mile to get people going, get people engaged. And that means, like you said, turning the meeting principles up to 11. Now,
Yep.
real quickly, I just want to touch on kind of technology when it comes to this stuff.
Good.
Just a couple quick notes. So when you're setting up a remote meeting, some things to think about are what type of tools are you going to need for this meeting, and then find the right platform. For instance, do you need to be able to break people out into small groups? Hopefully, I think that would make a good remote meeting if you're able to break people out in small groups. Do you need to do some kind of whiteboarding with the team where people can all contribute to it? All right, so find the technology that allows you to do that. For us, we use Zoom. It has all the tools that we need. Zoom, first one's on us. And then with that, one thing that I've learned from experience is always have a plan B for your technology. Meaning, if the video's not going through, at least have a call in number so people can still join. And then, and I probably don't even need to say this, but I'm going to do it anyways because that's kind of what I do. I say things that don't need to be said. But setting up the technology well ahead of time and testing it out so you're not spending the first 30 minutes of your meeting figuring out
Yeah.
how it works.
Yeah, that's great. I circling back again, I noticed, and this is just I'm just learning right now. I noticed when you invite people to a Zoom meeting, there's automatically call-in numbers that they provide for you right there. So I totally want to just support what you're saying, Ethan. Have multiple ways for people to plug in if the technology's not working. Use a system that's really robust and meet your needs. And I know I'm literally just echoing what you said, but the startup thing, in in-person meetings, I can't tell you how frustrating it is. You've all done that, folks. You show up to a meeting and the presenter spends the first 15 minutes trying to get the PowerPoint working, or whatever. It's so frustrating, and that's especially frustrating when you're sitting there in your own private room or your office at home or whatever, and you're just watching people kind of fuddle and fiddle with things. So
You say
get there
fuddle?
ahead of fuddle. Is that a word?
I don't know,
Fuddle.
but I like it if it is.
Fuddle,
Fuddle.
fuddle. Let's trademark that one. That's a
All
good
right.
word.
We'll coin
So
that phrase.
people are fuddling and futzing and frickling with their
Wow.
stuff, and
Easy
they
there.
and they so in a remote meeting, it's even more important because there's so many moving parts. Well, you're dealing with technology, so meeting facilitators, get there, get set up, test everything, so that you're ready when people call in.
I like that. Now, so we've talked about the technology. Let's jump into the actual meeting itself. Um, how would you start out one of these meetings? And keep in mind that, like we said, I think there's a sense of human to human connection that gets lost
Yeah.
when you're having these remote. So, how do you begin the meeting in a way that fosters a sense of, hey, we are in this together, we're connected here, and we're here to collaborate?
Yeah, I actually I recommend sort of three different things that can be done at the very beginning that I think help with what you just said, Ethan. Help us connect, help us to kind of get into that sort of mindset and sort of that vibe of we're all in this meeting. The first thing is just and these first two things can kind of be in reverse order, but the first thing is kind of a check-in. The second thing is a little bit of a sort of mingle time, and the third thing is an icebreaker, maybe. So we can talk about all three of those, but let me just start with that very first thing. I just think it's really good to, once you're kind of connected, to just have everybody speak up for just this isn't even the icebreaker, even though it can kind of count as sort of an icebreaker. It's, hey, it's Tom from San Francisco. I'm here. it's Deborah from Milwaukee, that kind of thing. Just a quick say your name and, show yourself, in that sense.
Announce who's in the virtual room.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Just say who's there. What you're replacing is, even though there is video, we hope, and we'll get to that in a second, but, we hope there's video, but even with video, you're kind of replacing that, you walked into a meeting room together and you saw each other and you said hi. So it's
Mm.
that, here I am, right? And then the mingle time. And I'm, there's kind of mixed feelings about this for some folks, but I like it. I like the, a couple minutes of just letting people just talk to each other. And, they're also testing out, their microphones, and they're kind of getting situated, but give people some time but actually make a container for that. Don't make it look like you're not in control. Don't make it look like nothing's happening. Say you're doing it. Say, hey guys, we're just going to spend the next couple minutes with, hey, mingle, say hi to each other, get settled, and then let it be for 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, I really like that. I like that last piece, the kind of having that mingle session, and I've seen that be suggested in for remote meetings by other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not to beat this dead horse, but I think it just keeps going back to fostering a sense of connection with that group who are all in remote locations. And just a couple minutes of just chatting about how the week's going, how people are dealing with, the CV-19, whatever it might be. You kind of break bread there in a sense. So,
Yeah. So hold on, let me jump in because I love what you just said. That
uh-huh.
that mingle time is really their mingle time, right? So they're all going to just kind of chat. You're not really introducing any topics or anything yet, right? So you start with this. Everybody says hi. Then you move into sort of a mingle time, and then it becomes again, I maybe optional, but I really like it. The idea of a bit of an icebreaker. And
Yes.
what you just said was really awesome. You might just have a topical quick icebreaker. It might be, hey, how, everybody share, depending on the size of your group, right? Everybody take 30 seconds and share, how you're doing in terms of X, Y, or Z. You can list anything you want. I mean, it could be about the current zombie apocalypse. It could be, I did one a couple months ago, and it was basically, I just said, everybody has 30 seconds to just let us know what you're going to be doing, what you're looking forward to as we start to move into spring. What's something you're
Mm,
looking forward to doing in your life? It could be anything.
nice. What are you looking forward to as we move into spring?
Well, that's been a little compromised with with
I guess
what
so.
what spring kind of looks like right now. But I am really looking forward. The sun has been out the last couple days up here in the mountains, and it's just been amazing. And I've gone on some runs and some walks, and I'm looking forward to getting my motorcycle and going on some rides up in the hills. How about you?
Fantastic. Oh, the sun, getting out in the sun in the mountains, going for some hikes, going for some runs, just enjoying the beautiful area that we happen to live in.
Is this another DNA thing that kind of we just have so many similarities?
Nurture, nature, who knows? Um, well, so let's move on. So we talked about, having that mingle session, doing some sort of icebreaker. This is all about getting the group connected and settled in, ready to have productive conversation, work-related conversation. Um, Now, when we get into kind of the meat of the meeting, and even before you start a meeting, we have recommended to people to create kind of a virtual meeting code of conduct. And what this means is literally sitting there with your team online and discussing as a group, hey, what meeting behaviors during this online session do we want to encourage, and what behaviors do we want to cut out? Now, if you're leading a meeting, Mike, say you're the facilitator of this meeting, and you want to have this conversation with your folks of creating this virtual meeting code of conduct, how would you go about that? Where would you start? How would you get people involved? There's three
Oh,
questions for you.
yeah, they're great questions, and I love this piece. Well, a couple things. There's actually a couple different ways to do this. If you have a team of people that are meeting together regularly, and you're going to continue to do that, I would maybe consider having a meeting about this. Like that would be your agenda. Like you might just do what we just described. Have your checking in and you're mingling and your icebreaker. And then, the agenda basically is this.
Ooh.
It's creating, going forward. I would say to my group, look, these are hard, right? These meetings can be difficult. Let's make these as awesome as we can. Let's make these
Mm,
effective. Let's make these enjoyable. Let's make these meetings where we all walk away saying, "Hey, I'm glad I was there. There was value added." Well, how are we going to do that? And so, what I would ask people to do ahead of time is to maybe come to the meeting with their thoughts. I would give them a question ahead of time that says things like "Hey, what are the meeting behaviors that we all want to be committed to? What are the meeting behaviors that we all want to avoid to make these meetings awesome?" You could
right.
even add another question for them to think about ahead of time. And this would be another part of that meeting, that first meeting. What do you need from me as a facilitator? What do you want me to do and not do that would make these meetings awesome, right? So now
Mhm.
you've got these people processing this, and now they show up for this meeting. And now it's time to put that together.
So
And
you haven't. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I'm
Speak.
just I'm just saying. So what you're telling me is that you're having a meeting about running meetings.
It's
A lot
yeah.
of a lot of people might hear that and puke in their mouths, but you know, when this is new territory for a lot of people, running virtual meetings. Like you don't want to just kind of go at it ad hoc and hope it goes well. I think this is important here. So anyways, continue. Sorry, I
Yeah,
just had to add that.
no, I'm glad you said that, because I actually want to piggyback on what you just said. I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is kind of go into these with, okay, guys, I guess we have to do this remote, and all right, let's start talking. Item number one, blah blah blah. I just think that's a huge mistake. I think you can actually raise expectations during this first meeting. You can actually
Mhm.
get people kind of excited about the fact that we're going to do it this way, and it's not going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to work, right? So I think, okay, so everybody shows up, you're ready to start the discussion. This would be a wonderful time to use your small group function on your platform. And there are platforms that include this, including Zoom. So,
Zoom, we are taking sponsorships.
yeah, call us Zoom, call us, please. Yeah, we can, I'm going to get you guys into groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, and I want you guys to talk about this. And you ask them that question again in the small group. And I would start with, make a list of behaviors that everybody needs to commit to make these meetings effective, and make a list of behaviors that people should be avoiding. Have them discuss that, then get the group back together, call on each group one at a time to bring forth one of their items, whiteboard it right there in front of them. If you have that feature, Zoom does that too. And then go for there. Okay. And I'll stop droning here in a second, but you make that list, and then you talk through it. You kind of walk through it once that list is up there, and you, as a group, you make commitments to those things.
Mm. Yeah, that's hugely important. What might some of these meeting guidelines and behaviors look like? I mean, obviously, they could be different from group to group, and that really is up to your group to decide. But say you were running this meeting, what would be some of these behaviors that you're looking to foster or cut out?
Yeah, why don't you and I sort of toggle back and forth on these? Let's take some
Yeah,
turns on
let's
this.
do this
And
ourselves.
yeah, and again, listeners, what I would recommend you don't do is come to a meeting and list these for your people. Let them create this, and then if there's some gaps, go ahead and fill in the gaps and make sure the list is complete. Side note: if you, for whatever reason, don't have the time and the space to do an entire meeting about meetings, you can do a mini version of this at the beginning of a meeting. You can just kind of have a quick discussion about some of these rules of the road if you'd like to. But all right, but good question, Ethan. Let's mention some of these. I would start with, as a participant, and this is kind of a big area, but you've got to be geared up to be very, very present. And that's going to mean things like starting off being in a place where you really are, and this is going to be tricky in today's craziness going on, but finding a place where you're alone, where it's quiet, where when you're speaking and you're not on mute, there's not a lot of background noise. And you and I both know, Ethan, right now that's might be challenging for parents right now who are home and their kids are home, and there's contingencies right now that we have to kind of deal with. But I would say the first thing is find a place where it's quiet. And I'll just add to that, you're not doing something else. And I cannot overemphasize this one. And it's easy for people to cheat on this one. And you've got to, that's why you have to commit to this as a group. You're not going to come to this remote meeting and also be typing or, doing some other work or, eating loud potato chips or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I might call this just we as a team will come here in a meeting mindset and location, right?
Right.
Engaged, like you said, in a quiet place. You're not doing other work. You're not driving, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You're just here ready to collaborate. And by the way, again, I just want to reiterate that we're going through some meeting code of conducts that apply to virtual meetings. Just remember to keep in the back of your mind, we're still have all those other meeting behaviors that we discussed before are still part of the deal. We're just kind of adding more on top of them.
And this one right here is one that applies to both, of course. And I want to do a kind of an admission here, full disclosure. I've had to actually repent on this one. I've had to change my behavior really radically because I tell you what, I'm a multitasker, and I am so used to, having conversations on the phone, and whether it's just me and one person or whether it's a group of us, I love getting my headphones on and going outside and pulling weeds or, doing other things while I'm trying to have this meeting. And I've been called out on that a number of times, and I have not been called out because people don't feel comfortable calling me out, but it is freaking distracting for everybody else. And I finally got that through my head. And nowadays, because of this current situation we're in, I'm just kind of committing now that when I'm in a meeting, I am in that meeting. That's
Yeah.
what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. I can be a multitasker too. I've had my fair share of phone meetings or remote meetings, and it's just so easy to go do, especially when we're all home, working from home,
Right.
to
There's
go
so many
do
things
some
to do.
laundry or something like that. If I'm going into a remote meeting and I'm already kind of a little, gosh, I have other things I need to be doing, I almost look at this meeting as an exercise of mindfulness. And I won't get into that too much, but just what will it be like for me to be here, present, and completely engaged and paying attention to what everybody says? Think of it as an exercise, right? A concentration exercise, even. So now that said, so we're talking about being in a meeting mindset and location,
Mm-hmm.
which is hugely important. Another thing I would add to this meeting code of conduct for virtual meetings would just be the expectation that there's actually more participation than normal,
Right.
right? We expect to hear from everyone, and everybody needs to, when they walk into this virtual meeting, they got to flip a switch of like, I just have to stay engaged, because that's the only way that these meetings are going to be as productive and as useful as our in-person meetings.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's tricky because, in a not a normal meeting, sorry, in a live
How
meeting,
dare you?
everybody, yeah, we're in a live meeting, everyone's sitting there. There's obviously going to be quite a variance in how much airtime people take, right? Some people are going to probably be too involved in, a lot of comments, maybe too many comments. There's going to be people that are kind of right in the middle. There's going to be people who just don't even say hardly anything. And that to some degree is not going to change. Like, you're not going to change everyone's personality and, their level of participation. But I love this idea that you're getting at here, which you just ask people, but specifically those people on more of the processor side of the spectrum. If you remember our behavior style stuff,
Yes.
those people who don't tend to speak up much at all, it's those folks that I'm actually kind of asking to be a little bit more willing, maybe to jump in, a little bit more willing to speak up, because without that, because you don't have a lot of the other components of a meeting where you can really sort of see everyone and everybody's, right there at the table, you kind of lose energy. So I don't want my expedients who already talk a lot to start talking more necessarily.
Right. Yeah,
But
that message isn't exactly for them.
yes, exactly.
And we'll get into a few facilitation skills with these in just a little bit, but I mean, man, it takes a lot of work on the facilitator to be able to, for lack of better terms, facilitate that in an online
Right.
meeting. Hey, who do I need to get more involved? Who do I need to get to maybe back off a little bit? By the
Right.
way, there's a beautiful tool on most of these online platforms where you can actually just mute people.
That would be rude.
I'm
Someone's
kidding.
right in the middle of
I'm
talking.
kidding. Like, all right, you've shared a little bit too much. You could actually just mute them and just shut them up for a while.
Like a 5-minute timeout kind of thing.
And it's kind of like the passive aggressive. Okay, if you're not muted, that means it's your turn to share. No, I'm just kidding, folks. I joke. Well, yeah, let's go through some more of these. So in a meeting mindset, more participation than normal is expected. Just another. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Here's one of the things with remote meetings. What just happened right there does happen, right?
Yeah.
We have a tiny bit of delay, and so we end up speaking, kind of talking over each other. So let me jump on that one. And it's, again, I have to be me specifically as an expedient, as an interrupter. There's possibly going to be a bit of a delay, and not only might there be a technology delay, psychologically, in a remote meeting, people need a little bit more time before they'll jump in. Not everybody, but your processors absolutely need there to be a little bit more space, because one of the things about processors that we know is that they are absolutely just against any kind of interrupting. They don't want to cut anyone off. And so even in a live meeting, they're sitting there going, to themselves, they're thinking, okay, is it my turn? Has there been enough silence? Is it really my turn, or am I going to be interrupting? Well, you just turn that up, in a remote meeting. So I really encourage everyone to think about everybody being more comfortable with silence, allowing some more silence, waiting till the person who's speaking puts a period on the end of their sentence, and then maybe takes a couple breaths, before you jump in. So don't interrupt, leave some space.
Yeah. So another thing to keep in mind here is just kind of, I think we alluded to this earlier, but minimizing noise as much as possible. Again, there's always exceptions. We need to be, aware of the current situation. Currently, kids are home from school. Roommates are working from home in a crowded apartment. Okay, we get it. Just as much as you can, minimize noise, be in a quiet place. And if everybody's doing that, it could also give you the option of being able to keep mute off. In a lot of situations in big meetings, it's hard for everybody to, keep the mute off because there might just be a lot of background noise. But if everybody's in a quiet place, you might be able to do that. And that would just help facilitate more engagement. There's less of a barrier there of having to take yourself off mute and then talk to someone. Again, not always possible with bigger meetings, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Hey, let me jump in. To mute or not to mute, right? That is the question. And,
that is.
Conventional wisdom, mute when you're not talking. And I think that's a safe rule to follow. And as you said, especially if it's a bigger meeting. I was in a meeting a month ago, and there was just 4 of us, and we said no muting, and everybody was in a quiet place. And it was nice because it felt a little bit more like a meeting, right? You just could speak when it was time to speak. And so I think it's a balancing act. And I think that might be a decision to make as you start the meeting. Is this going to be a mute meeting, or is this going to be a not mute meeting?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's about, if possible, removing a barrier for participation. Someone that might not already speak up a lot, if they then have to reach to their mouse and then click unmute, by that time, they might decide not to speak up. So here's another one. Well, we already talked about, just having people should identify themselves, when they first get into the meeting, but also it can be helpful. And this is more in bigger meetings or meetings that for some reason video is not available, but just people will identify themselves before speaking. So you ask me a question, Mike, and I say, hey, this is Ethan here. And then continue with my response. That can just be helpful. I mean, just knowing who's speaking is huge for a meeting and for collaboration.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And of course, that'd be weird if there's 3 of us, but man, when you're up to 6, 7, 8 or more, I think it's really helpful. Hey, this is Debbie. This is my thought.
Always Debbie.
I pick on Debbie a lot. And at least that time I wasn't picking on her. I was just, using Debbie as an example.
Oh, Debbie. Poor Debbie. What else? What else do you have in mind here for code of conduct for virtual meetings?
I don't have any more specifics other than going back to our original list from other podcasts, which is really going back to what applies to any meeting. Like, it's okay to disagree. It's, we're going to basically have bullet points under the idea of respect. And, what does that mean in terms of how we respond to each other? It's kind of those same things, and maybe again, sort of turned up to 11 because we really have to make this work. This is a little redundant, but I just want to kind of circle back to something you said, Ethan. Again, be more willing to participate maybe than you would feel comfortable with. I think that's what's going to make this work.
Absolutely. Well, the last thing I would want to add here, just before we move into maybe some tips for facilitating these remote meetings, is just set the expectation and the agreement with your group that everybody will use their video feature whenever possible. Right? Again, we're looking for ways to continue to stay connected while we're remote, and being able to see someone. I don't have to say much about that. It's just better than just only hearing them. So use a video whenever possible, but as I said earlier, include a dial-in option for a plan B, just in case, the internet's not working as well, yada, yada, yada. So
yeah, I have a client that I was working with a while back, and they've been doing remote meetings for a while. They have a lot of employees in other states, and they've been struggling because the only platform they use does not have video, and they really have struggled. And I was able to gently nudge them toward a different platform. Again, Zoom. I hope you're listening to this. And it actually, just last week, I was talking to the CEO, and she said it really has changed their meetings to have video dramatically.
Oh, I believe that 100%. 100%. I mean, I worked in a workplace that we had a fair amount of virtual meetings, which were literally just call into a number, just because we were a sales team and we're traveling throughout the state. And they were really difficult. I didn't really know who was talking. And there's certainly a loss of connection there. This is fun.
Yeah.
Let's do some facilitation tips. Man, I've had a lot of caffeine and creatine today, so I apologize if I'm just talking way too fast.
I've had a whole lot of gin and no, just kidding. Yeah. I've had some coffee too.
Okay, good. So just to tie an end on that one, spend some time with your team, hopefully a whole meeting, and just collaborate on what do you guys want to get out of this meeting, and how will you make that happen? How will you continue to stay connected? And a lot of good is going to come from that. Now, facilitating, as we talked about in previous episodes on meetings, that's a heck of a difficult skill. And now you add in the ingredient of this is virtual and it's online and we're using technology potentially that nobody's really used before. That's a tall order. So where would you start if you were, say, coaching a facilitator that was going to run a remote meeting? What would be the first things that you would work on with that person?
Well, if you don't mind me overlapping from the last episodes, let me just really quickly say, organizations, if you're listening, train your facilitators anyways. Like spend some money and time on getting your facilitators up to speed on how to facilitate. Because like Ethan, what you just said, it's so true. It's hard. It's so hard to do all the things a facilitator needs to do. And meetings kind of suck if your facilitator is not confident and if they're not skilled. So train your facilitators. Yeah, so you're starting your remote meeting, and you've done the stuff we already talked about with, the mingling and the icebreaker and, et cetera. You've got your code of conduct figured out. Let's jump into maybe go over the agenda. That might be a really great thing to do in a remote meeting, is just take a it might just take 20 seconds. Just kind of walk through it with everybody would be a good place to start. So that's a facilitation skill right up front. I guess I'll turn this back to you, Ethan, but I really think that your facilitator has to really know the system that they're using. They really need to know their tools. They need to know how to break people into small groups. They need to know how to troubleshoot. They need to know how to use the chat function. You might even think about, I'm actually doing a meeting Friday night, a community meeting, and I'm having someone be my tech person to kind of be there with me. And so I can lead the meeting and that person can kind of toggle some of the switches and, kind of make things work on the technology side. let's lead into this other one, a real general concept. And here's a couple specifics on it is you've got to think about how you're going to get people involved, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
really want to, I mean, they've already code of conducted it into their commitments that we're going to do our best to have our skin in the game and be involved. But you as a facilitator, that's your job, is to get people involved. And so there's a variety of different things you can do to make that happen. For example, you're going to ask a question. You're going to ask probably more questions, and your
Mm.
questions, open ended. As opposed to, do you guys think this is a good idea? That's a yes or no question. Or um, how do you think the meetings are going? Fine, they might say. That's a one word answer. So you change those questions up so they're open ended. What are your ideas for improving our meetings? Give me your thoughts about this idea. What do you think I should do? So open up your questions, ask more questions, and then when you ask a question, and we already referred to this, please be okay with silence. And this is, I'll tell you, as a meeting leader, as a facilitator, it is so hard to do in a live meeting, and it's even harder to do in a remote meeting, where you ask a question and you just exercise patience and you let that silence be there, because it's much more likely people are going to speak up when you've
Mhm.
given them space.
Yeah. Being able to sit there comfortably with the silence.
Yeah, it's
Hey,
super
hey,
important.
hey, sit
Oh,
there comfortably with the silence.
you
Does
didn't
that
ask a
make you
question.
does that make you uncomfortable, Mike?
Yeah, yes, because you didn't ask me a question. What am I waiting for right now?
Okay. Good point. Good point. But no, yeah, in this situation, being able to sit there and just let people stew with the question and
Yep.
but not just jump in and answer it for them. But yeah, I liked what you said. There, you have to work extra hard as a facilitator here to get people involved more. And
Right.
that could be some of the things we talked about in the previous episodes. Maybe in certain sections, pass the facilitation role on for someone else to
Mhm.
take lead. Ask more questions. Maybe do more small group breakouts where people can have conversations more so than you would normally do, even though you should do that in all your meetings. Um, just working extra hard to be more engaging here. And
I
one
don't.
thing I'll add to that is just one thing I've noticed is that if you can at all minimize presentation length during remote meetings, that could go a long ways. Meaning, the only thing worse than a long presentation is a long presentation during a virtual meeting. And
Yes.
again, that goes back to just getting people to answer questions more, small group breakouts, so on and so forth.
Those are great. I love that. And one thing you just said really quickly, I think it deserves a little bit more time. Is you mentioned? Did you mention sharing the facilitation? Did I hear you say that?
I did, yeah. Just passing the facilitation role on, giving that up for certain sections, letting other people take the lead there. That can
Yeah.
keep people engaged.
Yeah, let me just comment on that. One of the principles that we teach in general is that if you're the manager, if you're the project manager, if you're the leader of that department, whatever it is, you are the facilitator in general, for sure. So don't. I really recommend against, hey, we're going to just sort of trade facilitation every week. Someone else is going to be in charge of the meeting. I don't think that's a good idea for many, many reasons. But it's really a great idea. You remember our friend Debbie, Ethan?
Oh, I know Debbie.
Yeah, Debbie. But so Debbie's the one that had suggested that we talk about this particular thing at the meeting, because it actually relates to her. It has something to do with the project she's working on. So I'm actually going to ask her ahead of time, hey, when we get to that place, would you jump in and lead that part of the discussion? So I love that. I think it's just another way to share. Well, it builds skills for one thing. It helps people learn skills, but it
Mhm.
also increases involvement and engagement in the meeting.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, hey, we are almost out of time here. One other thing I just want to touch on here with facilitation skills before we wrap up, and I'll let you say anything else you want to say as well. But I love the idea of ending each one of these virtual meetings by debriefing about the experience. Just saying, hey, let's look at that code of conduct that we created for our virtual meetings. Let's talk about how we did in comparison to that code of conduct. That's just all about adjusting and readjusting and continue to improve, make these meetings more fruitful.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So how do we do? We created this code of conduct. What went really well? What might we want to focus on next time to make it even better? Hey, there is one more thing. I should have just thrown this in there right before you got to that, but ending your meeting. This goes back to previous episodes, but boy, another one of those, turn it up to 11 when you're doing remote. Please, you guys, remember the ABCD at the end of your meetings. Summarize what you did. Summarize, for example, well, let's real quickly do those. A stands for action items. Okay, what did we commit to? What should we commit to? Who's going to be doing what? B stands for by whens and by whom. Make sure those assignments are really clear. The C stands for communication items. What did we discuss here today that needs to be communicated outside of this meeting, and who's going to do that and when? And then D stands for decisions. What did we decide? Which decisions did we get sort of partway to and we need to put in the parking lot for next week? So in live meetings and remote meetings, that recapping ABCD thing, I think, can really help meetings be more effective and enjoyable, actually.
Totally agreed. Yeah, folks, if you're listening to this episode and you haven't yet listened to episode 21 and episode 22, I would highly recommend going back and listening to those. That's just about how to run meetings, and all those things that we talked about in those two episodes apply here. Apply here to the virtual meetings. This is just kind of an extra layer when we're using technology. Mike, anything else you want to say here, or did we provide our audience with enough information?
Yeah, I think we did our best. I think there's a lot of good stuff. And listeners, I would be really curious as to what's working and where the gaps are for you if you are in this sort of new world of having to do remote meetings, or if you're an expert, you've been doing this for years. Maybe let us know what's working. Are there tips that we missed? I'm sure there are. Some ideas that we missed out on. Please email us and let us know, because we'd love to share those with our listeners.
I love it. Hey, one last question for you, Dad, before we wrap this up. I'm curious. What are you going to do this week to add a little bit more peace to your life?
Oh, great question. That's so hard because I can think of several. Let me pick one. First one that I think of is, okay, I'm going to play on my piano more. I'm a pianist. I've been playing since I was young. The last 10 years, I have not been playing much at all. And I've decided that during this time, I'm going to up my skill level. So that's what I'm going to be doing. How about you, buddy? What are you going to be doing?
Me, add a little bit more peace to my life during this time when everything's shut down and there's a lot of uncertainty. It's simple. I'm just going to try to get out in the sun as much as I can. If that means taking some phone calls outside, working from my laptop on little porch that we have,
nice.
Whatever. Direct sunlight can go a long way, and it makes me feel good. All righty, folks. That's all we have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, I have a huge favor to ask you. Huge favor. Please, just go into iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast and leave us a review. The thing is, the more reviews we get, the more likely it is for people like you to find this podcast. And we'd love to spread this information out there to other people. So if you found it valuable and you think other people would, I would love it if you could just leave us a comment or a review. Okay. Have a merry old day.
Hey, thanks everybody. Bye.